Good morning. In our Zen practice, we talk about Buddha nature or original nature. Buddha nature, all sentient beings have Buddha nature. Buddha nature is like space. It can't be added to or taken away, yet it contains everything. You could say Buddha nature is like absolute truth. And the phenomenal experience is like the expression of that in a relative sense. So there may be other sentient beings that are self-aware, but as human beings, we seem to be particularly obsessed with our self-awareness. There's two different directions we can go with this. One is we can become very strongly attached to and believe that we are separate to the extent that we are this separate being, and everything else is outside of what we consider us or our mind, our experience. That can lead to this misunderstanding that you exist as a separate, independent being, and that there is a self, an entity called the self. I guess you could say that our practice is really seeing how this identification with self isn't working out for us very well. So we come to the practice with this great question: the hell am I doing here? What is this? Who am I? In the Korean tradition, it's called a hadu, which is the great inquiry, the great question. So you sit with, what is this? Now, don't be mistaken. This great inquiry has nothing to do with this mind that you're identified with, your intellect and your sense of self. This morning, I'm sitting here in my meditation and I'm having a philosophical discussion with myself in my mind. And I'm answering all these questions. What is self? What is absolute reality? What is relative reality? Going on and on and on down this whole philosophical discussion with myself. And then I realize, what a waste of time. This isn't getting me anywhere. Does this solve anything? Are my problems solved? Do I have a greater understanding of what my life is? This, I call it sometimes mental masturbation. It can have a sort of a euphoric effect temporarily, just like masturbation, but it doesn't last. Why? Because here you are. Just this. If this happens, that happens. I think this, I have this result. I do this, I have that result. My intention is this, something else happens. Sometimes I don't get the result I want. Sometimes life puts me up against something that I don't understand. However, this inquiry can lead to the understanding that this idea of self is not real, that everything is always changing, and there is no real something you can hold on to and grasp called the self. Now, as you dive into this inquiry and you start to understand this, don't freak out, because as this false sense of self melts away, more and more, your true nature, your real self, safe also, place becomes more and more manifest. And what does that mean? So that's the question you have to ask yourself. And ask yourself if what I'm doing right now, how I'm being with this phenomenal experience, is it working for me? And what can I do differently? How can I perceive what this is actually and not add to it, not try to take something away from it, not to feel like it's something I have to struggle with, but just be with it and see what happens. Each of us has to find our own way. I can only tell you this, that for me, when I sat and meditated and got to the place where I realized thinking is just thinking, it's not who I am, things started to shift. I started to see who I am, big I instead of little I. Slowly but surely, eventually, my identification with this experience here became less and less painful and less solid. It became mutable, expressing and flowing without conflict, without having to go one way or the other. Just a immediate recognition, which from another view in our Buddhist practice is compassion. Compassion is free flowing energy that has no clinging nature. So sometimes I have to laugh at practices that we do. So even though we may be strongly identified with self, and we're going to sit here now and we're going to do a compassion practice. We're going to practice being a compassionate being. The only thing I will remind you about that, nothing wrong with it. Go ahead. It may help alleviate some of the stress. But you can't get to non-duality or original nature from duality. From the idea of separateness, being separate, you can't get to non-duality. So that's the conundrum. So why do we let go of this idea of self? So that we can experience things as they actually are, not the way we think they are. And then we're on what's called the Bodhisattva path, where we really are contributing and helping making everything the experience it can be. Another Zen master wrote a book called It Doesn't Have to Be This Way. And I would just refer to using that phrase in this respect, in this strong identification with self. It doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to live in fear. You can be free. So is there some sort of work involved? I guess you could call it work. You could call it a love affair, getting to know yourself. Wow, how wonderful. But as long as you're strongly attached to some idea of who this is, it's going to be pretty hard for you to recognize who this is. So, that's our practice, getting to know ourselves. And that means having this great inquiry. What is this? Or however it works for you. Those particular words may not be the ones that are the great inquiry for you, but there is something in your sense of being that directs you towards this inquiry. What is this? What is it? Who am I? And we do this not just for ourselves, you see, we do it for all sentient beings. All sentient beings have Buddha nature. So as we maneuver through this phenomenal experience we call our lives, I hope you experience peace and joy and freedom. So thank you for joining me this morning, guys. Have a great weekend. Take care, guys. Thank you.